Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento. I know how frequently we talk about the fact that us entrepreneurs, we're a little bit crazy. We tend to do so many different things at once. Part of it is because we have to wear so many different hats when it comes to running our businesses, but also part of it is just the ambitions, the drive, the work ethic, the passion that we have to not only be entrepreneurs, but build and lead lives that inspire us. That's why you're going to love today's guest and fellow entrepreneur, because this is someone that very much, he does everything professionally and personally. I'm so excited for all of us to learn from the incredible insights, perspectives, and vantage point of a somewhat newer entrepreneur. He's going to be the first to tell you about his foray into the world of entrepreneurship, but let me introduce you to him. His name is Andrew Mathewes. Andrew is new to entrepreneurship, having just left his last full-time role as the head of development at the National Civil Rights Museum at the end of June this year, 2025. A native of Memphis, Tennessee, and a graduate of the University of Virginia in 2011, he spent his 15-year career serving a number of incredible companies and brands, including Epic Medical Records, St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital, and the museum, in addition to several years as a legislative analyst for the Memphis City Council. The intersection between data, technology, and people has always been at the heart of his work. And so now he's decided starting that one company at a time isn't enough. He instead launched two companies, both Jehl Consulting and Stomping Grounds, in the last 6 months. Plus, he's a dad of 2 boys under 5 and a member of the board of trustees at their school. He lives in Midtown Memphis, where he can walk to their school, to their church, and that new brick-and-mortar business. Gosh, there's so much good stuff that I want to dig into with him, so I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Andrew Mathewes. Andrew, dude, so much good stuff for us to dig into. First things first, welcome to the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for the kind introduction and having me, Brian. I'm excited to get into all of that today.
Heck yeah. Well, let's not waste any time. I'm gonna put the spotlight right back on you, because I talked about the very many things that you've excelled at, both in the past, but also the massive bite of the apple that you've chosen to take on this year. So, Andrew, who the heck is Andrew? How'd you start doing all these cool things?
Gosh, yeah. I mean, I think you hit on so many, it's always hard to pick which part of your identity to talk about. I think the most important one is that I'm a dad and a citizen and a neighbor and someone who is trying post-COVID, post-iPhone over the last decade. Even though my job, or at least one of my jobs, is mostly about technology and analytics and data, I am trying to be as rooted in place as I can. And so that means, being with my 2 boys, August and Beckett, who are both under 5, and like you said, walking to church, walking to school, walking to this great place that I'm reopening here in Midtown Memphis. And so that's maybe the good starting point, and we can just kind of dig into everything else I'm doing and who I'm trying to be.
Yeah, well, Andrew, you're right. I want to start there, and I'm going to forewarn the audience that you and I are very much preaching to the choir and talking to each other today, because I feel like so much of your entrepreneurial journey, even in this first year, goes counter to traditional entrepreneurial advice. Everyone says focus, do one thing at a time, but I love the fact that you just right away, bang, 2 businesses. And I very much join you there in the fact that I have my hands in a lot of different pies. And truth be told, Andrew, I view that as a superpower. The things that I bring here on the air, if people ever tune in and they're just like, how's Brian know about marketing? How's he know about PR? How's he know about all these different things? It's because I do so many different projects. And when I look at what you're up to with Jehl Consulting, what I look at what you're up to with your brick and mortar business, I have a lot of questions there. It just seems to me like the 2 actually probably make you a better businessman, a better strategist, a better entrepreneur in so many different ways. So talk to us about that thought process and the logic behind 2 businesses that you launched.
Well, I think it'd be an exaggeration to say that there's a thought process. So justifying it or explaining it or trying to make sense of how they connect, it's something I'm really focused on right now. And especially since we just launched publicly the Stomping Grounds project last week, I'm really starting to have to talk about more and explain how these two businesses go together, and especially thinking about my clients on the consulting side and my LinkedIn presence and brand, and making them feel like I'm not ignoring them and starting a second business. I'm really trying to connect the two. And so you talked about marketing, right? And everything that we've done for Stomping Grounds has been so far very guerrilla, very all channel, always on. And so then finding a way to talk about that and how we bring that approach to our clients on the nonprofit marketing side and development side is really kind of how we're trying to do those things. And, big picture, it ties back to how I've tried to manage my whole career, always sitting at the intersection between technologists and business people, the coders, and then the nurses the next week at the hospital. Always been trying to speak both languages and sitting in that role as connector and liaison. And so in some ways, now I'm just starting two businesses so I can play that role between them.
I love that. But Andrew, as much as I praise you and as much as I say it's your superpower, I can't help but notice the massive contrast between the two business models. Jehl Consulting, obviously, you could start that in 10 minutes. You can literally start to say to clients that, hey, this is what I do. I've made a career out of this. I'm really good. I have these skills. I can deliver this outcome. Boom. All of a sudden, when it comes to consulting, you're in business in that way. Now, the Stomping Grounds, you are, for people who are watching the video of us right now, you are in your physical brick-and-mortar location right now. That is a whole different beast. There is a whole different set of overhead, of planning, of so much that goes into that. Paint that contrast for us, because it's clear that you enjoy both sides of those coins, but they definitely both present different challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. It has been, to your point, a completely different experience, a harder experience in many ways. It's been, this announcement last week was really 7 months probably in the making, and, been seriously thinking about it since basically this time last year at Thanksgiving. To me, the reason why I left the museum and chose to become an entrepreneur in the first place was this business, was my vision as a dad, as a business owner, as someone really focused on community, and really starting from that, okay, what is driving me crazy in my own life? I know so many entrepreneurs, that's where it really comes from. For me, starting my career as a software tester, succeeding at that came from just feeling, okay, why is this software being so gosh darn annoying? How can we solve that, right? And so starting this business, Stomping Grounds, which I should probably actually explain, we are, you're seeing me here in our restaurant, but this is part of a 1.4 acre campus that's a former bar and music venue and restaurant called Rail Garden here, like I said, in Midtown Memphis, Tennessee. And it was so beloved, which was obviously a big help in our PR strategy over the last week or so. And was a place that we loved before we had kids. It's a place that we loved as kids, was beloved for families. And when it closed last December, it really left a hole in our neighborhood, or really it's the intersection of two great neighborhoods here in Midtown. And so I'd been thinking about, people do, oh yeah, sure, I could start a bar for my friends and me. And then for me as a dad, it's I wake up on a Saturday morning in July, right? And you've got two toddlers, so it's 5 a.m., 6 a.m., and you're 3 hours from the Children's Museum opening or the zoo opening. And if it's August here in Memphis, by the time the zoo opens, it's already a heat index of 105 anyway. And you pair that with finding a space where you can take two insane little boys to actually sit down in a restaurant and survive a whole meal. All those things are such a challenge. And it's a thing that if you're not a dad, if you're not a new dad or a new parent, you might not realize. And so that was really the problem that I set out to solve, and talking about it with parent after parent, focus grouping it informally, one family at a time. I couldn't finish the elevator pitch without someone finishing it for me. And so I knew we had the right idea And this property really just 2 months ago fell into our laps after 5 months looking at another location. And so then really it was a matter of started the consulting so that I could actually afford to do this and, not go without a salary. Luckily, I'm married to an incredible woman and business person who works actually at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital here. And so that's a big part of how I'm able to do this. And that's where I'm getting my benefits. And so I'm really lucky in that sense. And I don't know. Does that really answer the question? I don't think it really justified the ability to do this twice and then also, raise 2 little boys at the same time. But here I am. I like to stay busy.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, Andrew, it goes a long way towards answering the question. And shout out to your wife, because I've always loved, I became an entrepreneur 17 years ago when I was 19. And I always laughed at that phrase that I heard in entrepreneurial circles of look for a spouse with benefits. And I was just like, okay, I totally get that. As an adult entrepreneur now, I 100% understand the allure of doing that. And so, Andrew, along those lines, though, obviously, when you share those things with us, it brings up so many other things. First of which is a word that I keep hearing pop up in your answers and the way that you explain things, and that is the intersection. And I know how much connectedness is so important to you. And so I always think it's fun as the host of a podcast when I talk to our amazing guests, both on the air, but also off the air, we always kind of end up joking about how at the time, none of these steps made sense, but when we talk about them in retrospect here on podcasts, it sounds like they all make sense. Now, obviously, we're putting those pieces together today that you've had a lot of time to reflect on, Andrew. But with that in mind, I'd love for you to share more of that with listeners, because I think that all too often we think that from our professional careers, we're being pigeonholed. We think that we only have a set, fixed, array of skills and talents and experiences that have monetary value in the marketplace. But Andrew, looking at your career, I mean, I love the fact that you've worked in governmental positions, you've worked in healthcare related positions, you've worked in so many different cool ways. Obviously, your academic background as well contributes to where you are, but talk to us about that connectedness. And of course, selfishly, on behalf of our audience, I'd love for you to talk also about how you didn't necessarily know what these things were leading to, and how that retrospect, that hindsight being 2020, helped you to make sense of it all.
No, don't worry. It's not selfish, because the real answer is that, I've never been the kind of person who had a plan, a 5-year plan. And that's been one of the interesting things about starting up the brick and mortar, is that it's probably the longest, most intensely, most detailed I've focused on anything in my entire life. And that may sound bad, like it's only been really 7 true months, right? And so obviously I've been a part of major software implementations and projects that have taken longer, but to own every single piece of it, soup to nuts, breathe it, live it every single day, and be the one who's ultimately accountable has been really different. I've been rereading or really re-listening to the audiobook of The Innovator's Dilemma and Clay Christensen. And I'm going to get it wrong off the top of my head, but he talks a lot about discovery-based planning and really kind of this idea. And then, it harkens back to the Agile Manifesto and all those great ideas from modern software of not trying to think that far ahead. You have a roadmap, maybe you have a plan, maybe you have a longer term vision. But when everything is so uncertain, it's actually imprudent to plan that far ahead. And instead you stay in test and learn mode. You focus on who you are as a listener and a learner and someone who is adaptive, like every entrepreneur has to be. And then you just learn from there. You collect data as it comes in, adapt to what you found. And, I'm lucky. I think a lot of entrepreneurs are. I don't know about all of them, but that's just how I like to operate anyway. I like to, follow my passion. You work in analytics world, right? As, someone who has to be adapted to big data and machine learning. But I'm never happier than when I'm just, still in an old-fashioned spreadsheet, working in a pivot table, down in the weeds, like really understanding what's happening at the row level and kind of learning out from there and adapting.
Yeah, it's really cool. Actually, I haven't read much of Clayton Christensen's work in that domain, but I remember back in 2010 when I was in school, how many times the professors talk to us about the inventory world. And there's like, okay, just-in-time inventory. Obviously, we don't just want inventory sitting there for the sake of it. We want to master that timeline between inventory in and inventory getting sold and heading out our doors. And Andrew, the way that I always went with that is, because I was running my business at that time, I was like, I should adopt just-in-time learning. I should learn things as I need them, other than just like letting them sit in my brain just to decay, to rot over time, all of those other things that happen. And so it's cool to hear. I love that, the imprudence of planning long term, because things are going to change. We all saw that in 2020. Whatever plans we all had in 2020, instantly thrown out the window. That said, hearing you talk about kind of that old school approach and getting into those small details, Andrew, you also love technology. You utilize technology to your benefit. I think it's cool that entrepreneurs like you who have started in 2025, you are never starting anything alone anymore, because AI exists and it's such a powerful sounding board. It's such a powerful way to expand even your perspective, what your own eyes can see. What has that looked like in the structure of both of them? Especially, I imagine, brick and mortar, it's got to be super helpful to have that extra set of eyes.
I mean, I think it's been unbelievably transformative for me. And I think before I answer kind of like how I'm using tools like ChatGPT and generative AI and Gemini, I think it goes back to the previous question, the previous idea of why you need to be careful about planning too far ahead. I mean, I talk to my clients all the time, right? One of the things that I do for them is keep them from having to keep up with what's going on, right? In the same way that, it can be imprudent to plan in the face of uncertainty. There's no bigger uncertainty right now than what our tools and software will look like tomorrow. I mean, I think literally on Monday, right, I'm supposed to get GPT Pro 5.1, right? And I don't know what that's going to look like. And there's another software system for nonprofits on the development or marketing side popping up what seems like every week. So that's part of the answer to the last question. That's part of the differentiator that my firm has and the niche that I've been able to fill as, again, that person who has always sat in nonprofit world at the intersection of understanding the business, but also speaking technology. And so I play that role for my clients as advisor, as the person who is just keeping up with what's going on. And then as an entrepreneur myself, I mean, this is not an exaggeration. I could not have done it without where the tools are today in terms of AGI and ChatGPT. Doing this completely different business, I've never run a restaurant. I've never obviously started like a giant play cafe over 1.4 acres. I don't have an MBA. I have friends with MBAs, luckily, and so I can bounce ideas off of them. But no matter what question I have, I can just pull on my phone and run a deep research report or ask a pro question. And it can be really big things like, okay, what is a good model for how many drinks your patrons are going to drink in their visit, right? And so like, what's the attachment rate to that self-service beer tap? Or something as small as, oh gosh, okay, I have a walk-in cooler and I guess I need to have backup kegs for this tap. How much space do I need? How many kegs go in a cooler? I have no idea. So you build a team around you, obviously, that can answer those questions. And we're subletting the restaurant, which we're excited to announce in a couple weeks. But then I also am able to sublet and outsource and build my team around this incredible set of technologies that are getting better every single day.
Yeah, so well said. I want to go deeper in the direction of, you're alluding to a lot of the work that you do with Jehl Consulting. And Andrew, I'll confess this, that in Q1 of this year, as the founder of a nonprofit, I've realized how important the nonprofit game is. And it's because all too often, us as end consumers, we think nonprofits are just fun. We picture business plans made out of crayons. Like, we think that nonprofit is an entirely different beast. We forget that nonprofits actually, it's a very complex vehicle because funding is very important to us. We have to be sustainable. We also have that added layer of impact, but nonprofit doesn't mean that, we don't have the full business side of it. The business side is actually the side that we live or die on, that drives the amount of impact that we can make. And so with that in mind, I really appreciate professionals like you that bring your entire business expertise to serve that nonprofit space, because there's so much, and we're on limited budgets with regards to people capital, with regards to technology, with regards to processes. Talk to us about that, because it is such an important niche that I think gets overlooked way too much. The term that I really love, totally stealing it from the world of healthcare when I worked in healthcare for 10 months once upon a time, is underserved. There's so many underserved parts of the market. I'd love for you to talk to us directly about how you honed in on that work that Jehl Consulting does.
No, I love that question. Thanks. And I'm definitely going to have to turn it back on you and you tell me a little bit more about the nonprofit that you're running. You're absolutely right. Just because something is not for profit doesn't mean it's not a business. Doesn't mean that it doesn't have to make payroll. Doesn't mean that it doesn't have to find the funding, whether it's earned revenue from a ticket sale or a gala, or contributed revenue from a major gift donor or $25 a month monthly donor. It's still a business. And in some ways, I think I was really lucky that the start of my nonprofit career was essentially at as big as you could get with St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Now, a couple of years after I've left, they've passed $3 billion in fundraising every year to fund the work that St. Jude does for kids. And our CEO at the time, Rick Shadyac, who is a real inspiration for me too, always used the term bisanthropy, right? And really, you have to stay mission oriented. You have to stay grounded in serving the underserved, like you're talking about. But you do also have to run it like a business. And so my role has been being able to draw on the work of being a legislative aide and a community builder, having been a software tester and an analyst, really finding ways to, while staying true to a mission, learn from the private sector, learn from what great e-commerce firms are doing to improve the conversion of your donation forms and things like that, right? And so at Jehl Consulting, I'm really especially trying to bring that expertise and ability down market. And so after I left St. Jude, I went to a strong, mature, medium-sized organization like the National Civil Rights Museum here. And then now a lot of my clients are really in that 1 million, 2 million, 3 million in revenue space, not tiny enough to have a staff and a solid budget, but also still small and maybe working with a 1-person or a 2-person development shop. And to your point, I don't think any of those people should be thought of as unsophisticated. They're not writing business plans on crayons, but a lot of the times they are in it for the mission, for the people. They're relational people who got into fundraising not to run a tech stack and write their budget, but to help people. And so we try to bring that fractional model. I call it oftentimes technologist as a service. And so how do we bring our expertise, our experience, and now the ability, based on everything we've been talking about, to be as efficient as possible, and to be so much more efficient than I was even 3 years ago when I started at the museum, and do what a new hire for them could do in 40 hours, and we do it in 4, and really upskill them, put the pieces of their technology stack together. Once you have your systems working well, configured well, interacting between marketing and development and volunteers or whatever business model you have as a nonprofit and what kind of programs you have, then you can actually start to layer on good data and to layer on segmentation on the marketing side and to layer on A/B testing in your donation forms. And so that's really what we try to do for our clients and really help them do. And honestly, the most underserved people in the nonprofit world sometimes are the fundraisers themselves, if they're a 1-person shop and trying to do a little bit of everything.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think that, to your point, you made such an important point. I love that bisanthropy, that thing that you had shared about St. Jude's. That's something that I've never heard that term. And I really embrace that because I'm living it these days on the board, obviously, of the nonprofit that I launched earlier this year. And I think it's so important when I see St. Jude commercials. Andrew, I'm convinced that St. Jude, just like they know how to show up in the world. To me, they're the model in so many different ways. And we see the smiling kids, we see the smiling parents and the medical professionals. We forget that there's cameramen behind those cameras. There's script writers, there's marketers, there's copywriters, there's, gosh, hearing you talk about e-commerce optimization, I'm just like, that is state-of-the-art business that we forget has to happen to drive a nonprofit to have that level of impact. So it's really cool hearing that behind the scenes. I've got to squeeze this in with you because it's really fun. I knew today's conversation would fly by because we'd hop from topic to topic, but Andrew, I also know that you'll have a lot to say here that will be inspiring for our listeners, because I hear from listeners quite a bit, and there's always reasons for us not to start our businesses. You are busy in so many different ways. You are a dad of 2 boys under 5, which I think that's an incredible challenge. Kudos to you and your wife for keeping up with all of that as well. So Andrew, when you looked at the landscape of your career, the landscape of your ambitions and what it is that you want to do, what was that decision point that made you say, yeah, there's a bunch of reasons why I shouldn't start right now, but here's the defining reason why I'm going to, and why right now?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I think maybe one of the best ways to answer it is to go back to trying to square the circle of why these 2 businesses at the same time, because it kind of seems, nonprofit consulting over here, technology analytics, and then a brick and mortar place-based and eatery for kids and families. What in the world do those have to do with each other? But for me, both are rooted in community and rebuilding, to put it in like fancy Atlantic magazine terms, third spaces, or really just, that impulse to go back to knowing our neighbors a little bit better. Both of these really tie into that. It's building up the capacity of these small but powerful and important community organizations. And then it's literally just from my front door, stepping out one, block at a time. How do we make the communities that we live in healthier and stronger and more connected again? And so it's a combination. Why did I do this? Of, recklessness in a good way, like every entrepreneur has, but also a deep belief that this is the kind of work we should be doing as good citizens and good neighbors and good people. And so it ties together in that way. And to, editorialize in a slight tangent too, the thing I talk about a lot, and it defines my hiring model, which, we're going to run out of time to get into today. But as a dad, I think a lot about how to raise them, how to teach them, grow them, what the world is going to look like in 20 years when they try to go out and get a job for the first time. And going back to that point of it being imprudent to plan, like obviously we have no idea. And so all you can do is teach them to be as human as possible and to be able to ask good questions. And so that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I really believe that it will work, sure, but that also our communities need it.
Oh, Andrew, I love the way you answer that. And I'm going to encourage listeners, go back, re-listen to certain segments of this, and you're going to hear how many of Andrew's answers come back to stories, come back to emotions. They do not come back to, I really thought that I could monetize this skill. I really thought that this would be a profitable business. I think that if that's your driver up front, it's the easiest way to get discouraged, because listeners, I can say this from 17 years of entrepreneurial experience. Andrew can share this from his start as well. It's not the most profitable up front. Like, go get a job. If you want a steady paycheck, go get a job for sure. It's way easier. All of this stuff is what carries Andrew in his journey, what carries me in my journey. So Andrew, I really appreciate the way you share those things. I'm going to put you on the spot one last time here. It's a super broad question that I always ask at the end of every conversation, and that is, what's your best piece of advice for listeners? Knowing that we're being listened to by both entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs at all different stages of their own growth journeys, and knowing that you are one of us, you're a fellow entrepreneur, what's that one thing that you want to leave them with today?
My usual advice, and I think it is still applicable to the listeners here, it can be pretty basic. Everyone will tell it to you, but mentorship is so critical and is why I am where I am. That's the other thing that cannot be undersold. When I was at St. Jude, I worked with a then director who, over the course of those 3 years, was making her way up to VP, and we built a great relationship. She was that major gift fundraiser relational person, but had a background in management consulting and really appreciated my ability to understand the business, understand her side of things, but then bring that technical analytical side. And so then when she left to go be the chief development and chief marketing officer of the Civil Rights Museum here, I was her first hire. She didn't go out and find another fundraiser. She went out and found someone to build infrastructure underneath her. And part of the reason why I'm doing this too is, she left the museum last September. And so I started thinking about seriously what was next for me. And she went into consulting, and come March, she's like, okay, I've got a wait list now and enough business. I can throw you some hours on a subcontract. And so really nothing over the last 6-7 years wouldn't have been possible if after that project I did with her, I didn't just say like, hey, you're my mentor now, let's get lunch. And it was basically as straightforward as that. And now it's translated into so much of the growth in my career and capacity, my income and my ability. And so, I wouldn't be anywhere without a mentor. So if you're young in your career, if you're just stepping out to be an entrepreneur and you need to find another entrepreneur to be your mentor and coach, I can't urge you to do that enough.
Oh, yes. So well said. Andrew, that's an important point. I think that just because I'm 17 years into this journey, I forget to articulate that and to state that as often as I probably should. I'm really grateful for you sharing that with our audience. You really made me reflect on the fact that here I am 17 years into this journey. My very first mentor when I was 19 years old is still one of the first people that I call with exciting news, is still very much one of the first people I call when I'm at a crossroads, when I need additional insight to make those decisions. So, Andrew, kudos to you. I'm super grateful on the fact that you're aware, you reflect on that, and you share that message so generously with so many other people. And along those lines, I'm also very excited for people to actually see the work that you're doing, because we've talked about Jehl Consulting. I can actually see the Stomping Grounds behind you. You and I are on video together here today. But for listeners who are just listening and tuning in, you've got to drop some links on us. For listeners who want to find all the great work that you're doing, all the cool stuff that you're up to, where should they go from here?
Yeah, absolutely. So the easier one to find definitely now is Stomping Grounds. If you Google Stomping Grounds Memphis or go to letstomparound.com, that's where you can start to learn a little bit more about this fun thing that we're doing here. On the Jehl Consulting side, we've got jehlconsulting.com, and Jehl is a weird old German name spelled Jehl for those of you listening. And otherwise, you can find me on LinkedIn, hit me up. If you send me a note or a friend request, I will accept, and I'm happy to connect with anyone and everyone.
Yes, and listeners, don't worry about German spelling. We are dropping those links down below in the show notes. No matter where it is that you're tuning into today's episode, you'll be able to click right on through to Jehl Consulting's website, to the Stomping Grounds. You can check those out. Andrew, kudos to you for getting such a cool and clever domain. I absolutely love that. We're also linking to Andrew's personal LinkedIn. So if you want to reach out, you hear how much connectedness is at the root of his message. This is someone who is so amazing at putting pieces together, especially in worlds where maybe we don't even recognize how connected things may be. So listeners, definitely check out the links in the show notes. Otherwise, Andrew, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much, Brian. This was a ton of fun.